Is the Great Commission central in Lutheranism? And if so, what does a disciple look like? Hi, my name is Ted Rosenblatt, and I'm here with my father, Dr. Rod Rosenblatt, and this is Talks with Dad Rod. When it comes to being a disciple under the Great Commission, what does that look like? And is the Great Commission, a central part here of Lutheranism?
It is. But the way it's manifested isn't always the same for us as for others. First, the text. Matthew 28, look it up for yourself. You'll be familiar with it already, probably. But it's the call to evangelize every human being on the earth. Now, the shape that takes in discipleship, there's where we kind of differ with a whole lot of other Christian bodies. We would talk about the Bible basically being about Christ and who he was and what he said and what he did. That's what the Bible is about. The promise of the Messiah in the Old Testament and the fulfillment of the promise in the New Testament. Now, our church services don't sound like that. They sound more like a nagging mother. Our church services very often function or focus on Christ as the lawgiver. That's already screwed up. Part of what he did was to reinforce the law over and over and over again. But that isn't where he stopped. He ended up going from that to decide who I am. And from that, I'm going to do something for you that will make no sense right now, but it will later. And he was talking about his death and his resurrection for us and for the forgiveness of sin. So if the Protestant church would just follow the basics of offering people Christ every Sunday in his saving office, in his dying and rising for you, we'd be a lot better off. But it doesn't characterize Protestantism today. If I were to be snarky about it, I'd say it's a whole bunch of law light for believers. Do this, do that, do this, do that. And discipleship is one of the catch-alls of that especially grinds on me. Because in the place of preaching Christ is dying for you and rising again for you and for me, is put a whole bunch of Christian directives, how to be a disciple. Go to a different church. Go to a church where the pastor actually preaches Christ in his saving work, in his dying and rising for you. And if we did that, about 85%, I think, of most Protestant churches would empty out. Because that's what they're getting as their diet. I'm sick of discipleship because it's replacing what the Bible's about. Christ promised, Christ coming, doing what he said he was going to do for our benefit, and then rising again for our benefit and promising to return.
It's something I've talked about more than once online on social media about people who have been freed are better at helping others. They're better at bringing good news to others. They're better at helping in every possible way. People who are burdened and shackled with guilt and obligation and fear do far worse at that.
Yep.
If you've ever been on the job and you're doing some manual labor or something like that, if you've got an overbearing boss who's trying to make sure that you're doing it perfectly and you're going to get in trouble for every single error you make, your error rate, in my experience as a manager, goes way up. You increase the error rate through the law.
By law.
The law increases error rate.
Romans says that.
If you want to improve somebody's efficiency and decrease their error rate, you treat them with grace.
Yep.
You put yourself in the mix with them. You put yourself next to them and get your hands dirty with them, and then take on the mistakes that they, even that especially if you're a manager, you take on, I was taught this a long time ago, you take on the errors and they get the successes. And when the employees get to feel like they can win and that they are free and they don't have to worry about the like you always spoke of the sword of Damocles hanging over your head, and that the law in all its fury wouldn't come down on them. And this is just basic daily life. This is just work.
Yep.
Right? That you are far better in your job. You do better.
Yep. If I had one thing I could say to large businesses in America, the one thing I'd say is when you elect a CEO, elect a guy who had a wonderful father. And don't vote in a guy who's nagging like a bad mother. Find the guy who had a gracious father and put him in the spot.
And that's the kind of paradigm that we would like to get, ourselves personally in church.
Sure.
Right? Because then you get a better sense, you get a free sense, you get an open, and because you're forgiven now, sense. You don't have God as the big, nasty, overbearing boss who's looking for every mistake you make. Rather, you are free. And then we kind of tap in a little bit here to vocation. Right? You're free and you do your thing. Well, it's funny how hazy the lines get on vocation when you're happy and free. You start fiddling. You're not a baker, but all of a sudden you're making cookies or something. All of a sudden you find yourself having discussions with people you don't even know on subjects like this, and you didn't intend to. It just comes up, maybe on an airplane somewhere, in an airport or wherever. but that I have seen good, what we would call discipleship in certain respects, come out of freedom far more than law and threat.
Absolutely. It was John who said, he must increase, but I must decrease. It's exactly what's going on in that kind of world.
In forgiveness,
he must increase and I must decrease.
The grace of Christ is life. It breathes life into things. The law is death, and we feel that. You feel the death of that scenario as it's playing out, and you're part of it. That even in our everyday lives, just working our jobs at a grocery store or, an accountancy or whatever, when you feel like you've got a boss who's right over top you with a whip, it's gonna produce a certain result, and it's not gonna be ironically, it's not what the bosses want. They're actually producing failure.
Yeah, the fatherlessness of our country right now is going to work itself out in exactly the way you're describing. Those guys are going to end up in some kind of management position, and God help the workers.
And then, of course, and I was just talking about this with a family member this week, and then how often do they get promoted out of position? But the ones at the top are never let go, ever. The ones that are cascading down this failure to the poor schleps at the bottom. And I've been on the receiving end of that my entire life from my first job. From my first job, it was law and fail, and it just increased the failure rate. Nobody's business, and the bosses could not conceive. They could not conceive that they were creating such a failure environment. That's what they're creating. And it was really a condemnation environment. And I just wanted to be gone. I didn't want to be part of that. Funny how we, without thought, pick where the grace is versus where the law is. That's where we'll go. That's where we will spend our time. If there's law, we tend to shy away from it. Unless it gives us control. Unless it gives us some sort of feeling of control. That's a little different.
Yeah, it's an interesting question to ask in a churchly way. What part of the service that you just attended gave you Christ forgiveness and grace, and how much of it gave you marching orders and law? And that's an embarrassment to Protestantism. Let Rome do that.
Well, somebody should bring some gospel back to the church. Hope this has been helpful for you. This has been I've enjoyed this one. This has been fun. Come to 1517.org for more, and visit us on social media. We'll talk to you soon, and hit us up. These kinds of questions, I think, are going to resonate. Talk to you soon. Thank you for joining us on Talks with Dad Rod, part of the 1517 Podcast Network. This podcast and all 1517's content is made possible through financial support by listeners just like you. Please visit 1517.org for more, and please consider clicking on the donate button and making a recurring or one-time contribution to help us share this good news in a world which so desperately needs it.